Hi, I'm Trevor Stevenson, and I am welcoming you to Your Story Will Be Different. This is a narrative play podcast where I tell you the story that came to be from a playthrough of a solo tabletop role-playing game. For this session, we are concluding Dumpas Glebe's Adventures in the Intersection from a playthrough of the game Lone Eons by David Blandy. That said, let's dive back in. Through the limbs of bone-white trees, light fractured through a lattice work of leaves, scattering and shifting mosaics across the forest floor. Small creatures, some feathered, some scaled, some seemingly made of rock, flitted through the shafts of brightness. The air was heavy, warm, and sweet, and for the first time since emerging from the caves, Dumpas felt a flickering of something like serenity. He followed a broad animal trail until it widened abruptly into a clearing. A disheveled caravan sprawled across the open space. Makeshift tents woven from animal skins, bundles of tools tied to broken stakes, and a few half-built structures of knotted branches and resin. Winged beings moved among them. Tall, elegant figures with long limbs, flexible joints, and wings that draped like cloaks when folded. Their feathers shimmered with iridescent colors that shifted subtly with each breath. A few of them turned as Dumpas entered, and their bright, compound black eyes followed him with intense curiosity rather than suspicion. They whispered to one another, and their voices were melodic yet metallic. One of them, a towering figure with feathers the color of dawn light, stepped forward and offered a dip of the head. "Traveler, share shade with us if you wish." Dumpas accepted with gratitude. They led him to a low bench formed from a fallen tree trunk and offered him a bucket filled with cool water. The bucket was strange. It was rigid yet colorful and humming faintly with ruptured molecular bonds. It took Dumpas a moment to realize that it was made from ancient plastic, legendarily rare material in the Haven. He drank greedily, and the reaction was immediate. A sharp chemical bitterness coated his tongue. Heat bloomed inside him, racing through his limbs. His vision warped as he staggered, gripping the edge of the bench as his heart thudded like a hammer against wet stone. The winged beings erupt into a buzzing panic. A tall figure with molted wings elbowed through the crowd, and he introduced himself as Minkle Deep Hail. His feathers were darker than the others, almost oily, and his expression was etched with a weathered kindness.
"Foolish plastic. Old poison. They should have known it's not safe for your kind."
He knelt beside Dumpas, pressing a flask into his hand.
"Drink this. All of it."
Dumpas hesitated, but the heat inside him was growing unbearable. He uncorked the flask, and the liquid inside was as clear as crystal, but with fumes sharp enough to sting his eyes. He swallowed it, and it hit him like an avalanche. His muscles slackened, his bones softened, and all the tension in his form dissolved in an instant. The world spun into a blur of color, and he tumbled backward. He felt the forest floor soften under him, as though cradling his fall.
"Rest. The drink burns the sickness. Tomorrow you'll walk. Tonight, you fall."
And darkness carried him away. When Dumpas awoke, the light had shifted and the caravan was gone. Dumpas pulled himself off the ground, just as the trees trembled. Something vast shifted between them. He felt a tremor before he heard anything. It began as a gentle vibration running through the soles of his feet, stirring loose soil and tiny stones. Birds, or what he thought were birds, burst from the treetops in spiraling flocks. The forest stilled in an uncanny way it does before something ancient approaches, something that the land itself acknowledges. And then the trees parted. What emerged was not a beast, not a machine, but a chimera somewhere in between. A towering bipedal creature with bark-thick skin, the color of old roots, and limbs as broad as tree trunks. Its spine curved slightly under the weight of a building. There was an entire wooden structure strapped to its back with woven vines and resin. The building swayed gently with every step. Windows shuttered, and smoke trailed lazily from a chimney at the top like a plume from a wandering mountain. The giant paused when it saw Dumpas. Its head, shaped roughly like a humanoid skull but elongated and adorned with furry growths, tilted to the side thoughtfully. One enormous eye blinked sideways, a membrane sliding left to right, and it was translucent and shimmering. The creature spoke, and its voice was deep and resonant, like stones cracking under pressure.
Minnow, you are in my path.
Dumpas stepped aside immediately. My apologies. I did not hear you coming. The giant made a low, amused rumble. It crouched slightly, an act that shook the ground like a mild earthquake, and leaned close enough that Dumpas could smell earth, sap, and the faint musk of some kind of symbiotes living in the cracks of its bark skin.
What do you seek, cave-born?
Dumpas hesitated, then told the creature of his experience so far and asked where one, such as himself, should head next.
The Defal trade stories, tools, and seeds at a settlement not far from here. They speak to me sometimes. They call me South, for I always walk in that direction, even when I do not mean to.
Dumpas bowed respectfully. Then you know the way. South nodded slowly, and the wood building on his back creaked with the motion.
Climb inside. Easier for both of us.
Dumpas had never climbed a living creature of that size, but found the handholds easily. Knots in the bark, thick ridges of growth, and sturdy vines purposefully wrapped around exposed surfaces. The building on South's back was warm from his body heat. Dumpas pushed open a door the size of a barn shutter and slipped inside. The interior was surprisingly small but cozy. A single room with a sloped ceiling, cushioned with dried moss that somebody had purposed as bedding. Crates stacked neatly against one wall held preserved fruit, glistening resin jars, bundles of herbs, and curious carved trinkets left by travelers who had ridden south before. The room swayed gently with each of the giant's steps, but Dumpas found the motion comforting, like resting in a cradle or a hammock. Through a wide window, the forest streamed past in massive green waves. South's enormous strides carried them over rivers, around boulders, and through groves where sunlight broke into fractal patterns across the carpet of ferns. Birds perched briefly on South's shoulder before taking flight again. Forest creatures watched from the shadows, cautious but not afraid. During the journey, Dumpas spoke through the window, and South answered in his steady, rumbling voice. Do you wander alone?
I am seeking my own kin. We once walked in groups, many giants, moving as one. We carried homes, not for ourselves, but for others. Builders used to live on our backs, priests and healers. We were guardians of the old world. Now I find none of them. The others have gone still or returned to the ground. I walk because someone must.
Dumpas felt an unexpected kinship. Two beings from insular homes, pulled outward into a world unraveling at its edges. Hours passed. Eventually, the forest thinned, giving way to a small hill crowned by a shimmering veil of light, and south slowed.
Here, the spring of clear water. You seek rest before you will find the settlement. This place heals and cleans. When you are ready, follow the sun and you will find what you seek.
Dumpas climbed down the giant's arm, landing near the edge of a crystalline pool. The water sparked unnaturally, floating minuscule motes of light that swirled in gentle spirals. South straightened to his full height again.
Walk safely, Dumpas Glebe. Your journey carries weight. The forest listens, and the world shifts.
He lifted one colossal hand in farewell.
And should you need me, walk south. I will find you.
Dumpas nodded deeply. Thank you, South. May your wandering find purpose. The giant turned and strode back into the forest, each step soft but thunderous until he vanished between the trees as quietly as a passing cloud. Dumpas knelt by the spring, dipping his hands into its cool surface. For a long time, he simply breathed. This world was vast, strange, and alive in ways he had never imagined. And he was part of its story now. This was all just a story he would tell as a sojourner in the haven when he returned. He turned his attention back to the spring, which looked impossibly clear, clearer than anything Dumpas had ever seen underground or above. Strange leaves floated across its surface. They were broad, veined, and iridescent, but instead of drifting downstream, they pushed upward, rising slowly into the branches as though gravity had simply given up on this particular pocket of the intersection. Dumpas had just cupped the cool water to his lips when he heard someone muttering nearby. You could hear that they were frustrated, out of breath, but still determined. He looked through a cluster of reeds and found a woman kneeling beside the bank. She was sweating with effort, pulling at the floating leaves, trying to stuff them into a woven satchel before they drifted out of reach. Each time she grabbed one, it simply slipped upward, twirling away with quiet defiance. She gritted her teeth.
Come down, you useless, drifting things.
Do you need help? The woman spun to face him, nearly losing her balance. She was unmistakably a cryogenic mortal, one of the cloned humans that were bred for labor and obedience. Her features were symmetrical in a clearly engineered way. She wore some body armor made from overlapping plates of glossy hide, reinforced with slick, slimy scales. Her symmetry was only blemished by a long scar cut diagonally across her cheek. The wound had healed poorly. Dumpas inferred that she had been alone so long that no one had been there to help her treat it properly. Her eyes narrowed.
Who are you? What do you want?
Dumpas raised his hands, palms open. Nothing from you. She stepped back into the water, cutting him off.
Stay back. I'm not defenseless.
She reached for a hook blade strapped to her side and froze. Her face drained of color.
What is?
Dumpas saw it before she did. Leeches. Dozens of them. They clung to her calves and thighs, slick and bloated, gorging on her blood. Their bodies pulsed faintly, rhythmically.
No, get them off. Get them off.
She stumbled forward, tripping in the shallows. Something small fell from her satchel. It was a tiny wood carving no bigger than Dumpas's thumb. It rolled and landed near her feet. The shape was a crude, stylized representation of a haven dweller, carved with reverence. He knelt beside her, ignoring her panic swatting. "Don't move," he said. "You'll tear your skin."
I don't need your help.
Dumpas grabbed her wrists gently but firmly, pulling her out of the water. The leeches clung stubbornly and they were anchored deeply. Some had already burrowed partway into her flesh. Dumpas shifted his hands, just enough to sharpen his fingertips into chitinous points. He scraped the leeches free, one by one, flicking them into the underbrush. The woman hissed, whimpered, and cursed under her breath with each one that was removed, but she didn't push him away anymore. When the last leech slid off with a wet pop, Dumpas collapsed back on the shore, chest heaving. The woman stared at him, shock and confusion warring on her face.
It's... You helped me.
It was almost as if the fact didn't make sense to her. Dumpas handed her the wood carving. "You dropped this." She took it with trembling hands.
It's... I shouldn't have.
"Why?" Her mouth tightened.
Because it's memory. And the cryorg doesn't allow those.
Before Dumpas could ask more, the world lurched. This vision blurred and tore open his mind. Colors smeared together, forming the faint outline of a face or many faces. A cryorg mortal identical to the woman before him, standing on a different world beneath a red sky. The word Mars leapt into his thoughts, and he gasped as the vision collapsed inward like a dying star. The cryorg woman in front of him was already backing away, clutching the carving to her chest.
I have to go. They're looking for me.
"Who?" Her eyes darted towards the forest.
Everyone.
And then she fled, limping as she vanished into the trees. He sat alone beside the spring as the drifting leaves swirled upward once more. Dumpas rose to his feet, moving carefully along the bank of the spring. He shook off the remnants of the vision that had gripped him like the bindweeds he had encountered earlier. As he crossed into a thick grove of bulbous plants, he saw a figure crouched at their base, harvesting herbs. At first, Dumpas thought it was humanoid, but as it rose, its shape and proportions resolved into something far stranger. The creature stood tall and thin, but segmented. Its body was covered in molten reptilian scales, though red leaves bloomed from patches along its limbs in swirling patterns. A long, curling proboscis extended from its face, retracting and extending with wet clicks that tasted the air. Its eyes were a tryptophobic nightmare, and they were fixed on Dumpas.
A traveler. A shifter.
The words slithered with fascination and maybe hunger.
Lucky for me.
Dumpas straightened. "I have no quarrel with you." The creature's mouth somehow curved, although its anatomy made the expression more of a grimace.
But I have one with you. You glow. You carry valuables. Armor. Tools. The essence of your skin. And I am owed much by this world, so...
It spread its clawed fingers.
Give them to me.
Dumpas remained still. "Walk away."
I am not a child scavenging scraps. I am Tevrik, the gatherer, collector of relics, eater of old knowledge. You will not deny me.
Tevrik lunged forward with startling speed, proboscis slicing through the air as a weapon. Dumpas shifted instinctively, bones tightening, muscles thickened beneath his skin. The proboscis scraped his shoulder, but failed to pierce. Dumpas countered with a heavy shove that sent Tevrik stumbling backwards into pulsing plants, which squeaked and contracted in irritation. Dumpas found that this creature was lighter than he expected. Snarling, this gatherer scraped the air with sharp, curved talons.
You fight? Good. I have not tasted vigorous prey in many cycles.
Dumpas sidestepped another lunge and planted a solid punch into Tevrik's thorax. It rattled like hollow wood. The creature hissed, half in pain, half in grim delight.
Strong, but strength without cunning is meat waiting to be filleted.
He swept his hand in a wide arc, releasing a burst of leaves that glowed ruby red and radiated heat. Dumpas held his breath and dove behind a thick root. The leaves sank into the dirt and sizzled, burning tiny craters into the soil.
That could have melted your eyes, or made you dream forever.
Dumpas didn't bother responding. He surged out from cover, shifting just enough to bring weight and momentum into his movement. He rammed Tevrik with his shoulder, driving him into a cluster of spore bulbs, and the bulbs burst, releasing a cloud of mint-scented vapor that temporarily masked the two figures. Dumpas used the cover and the opportunity as he pivoted behind Tevrik and seized him by the arm, twisting sharply, and a crack echoed. Tevrik screamed, a shrill, piercing sound that sent flocks of floating microbirds scattering through the canopy.
You break my arm.
He flailed his remaining limbs. Dumpas pinned him to the ground. Leave. Now. Or next time, I break more than that. Tevrik spat a thin thread of bioluminescent drool.
This isn't finished, ground thing.
Dumpas released him, stepping back with deliberate caution. Tevrik scrambled to his feet, clutching his twisted arm to his chest, and fled into the underbrush, tripping over roots, muttering curses, and vowing vengeance to any spirit that would listen. Dumpas exhaled slowly. The air grew cooler as he continued his journey and followed South's guidance. He noticed that the wind was tinged with the scent of crushed stone and metallic pollen. The trees thinned gradually, and their trunks gave way to low mounds draped with soft moss. Beneath the greenery lay something older. It was far too rigid and linear to be natural, and he could feel it humming faintly through the soles of his feet. He had stumbled into a place where the myths of the past collided with the intersection. The clearing opened before him in a quiet explosion of color. Verdant growth burst from every surface. Flowers in a riot of vibrant hues pushed between cracks of earth and broken stone. The petals gleamed with iridescent oils that refracted the afternoon light into shifting prisms. Ancient vines wrapped themselves around shattered metal beams, pulling the remnants of a forgotten structure back into the embrace of the living world. At the center of the clearing rose the Ever-Sharp. At first glance, it looked like a cluster of thin metallic spires, each thrusting up through the ground at a precise angle. But as Dumpas approached, he saw the truth. These were the rustless tips of colossal metal towers, once part of the pre-collapse installation whose base now lay buried under centuries of soil and plant matter. He put his hand on it, and the metal was unnervingly smooth. There was no rust, no corrosion, no sign of decay at all. Even the flowers seemed to avoid touching the spires directly. They grew in perfect spirals around them, as though they were wary of its unyielding permanence. The air around the spires hummed quietly. It was a low, resonant vibration that settled into Dumpas's bones. The Ever-Sharp had lived up to its name. Dumpas approached with slow, respectful steps. He knew instinctively that this was a place of pilgrimage, not mere debris reclaimed by nature. And he was not alone. There was what seemed to be a family of 5 individuals, each draped in shimmering cloaks woven from iridescent feathers. They knelt before the tallest spire, and their feathers shifted colors in subtle, hypnotic waves. Rose to gold, gold to green, green to a deep blue. Their faces were smooth, and their skin appeared almost glossy in the filtered light. They did not look up at Dumpas as he neared. Instead, their murmured prayers continued and harmonized with the hum of the shrine. Dumpas paused several paces away, unwilling to disrupt their devotion. The largest of the spires reflected his silhouette back at him in distorted silver. He saw himself as a traveler, half covered in moss and dried blood. His armor was cracked from the bindweed, and his form subtly shifted beneath the skin even at rest. He looked like a stranger to himself. The hum grew stronger, and then it began vibrating behind his eyes. A vision seized him. At first, it felt like an echo. Distant voices were layered on top of one another with metallic dissonance. Then the images sharpened and cut through the world like a blade between his ribs. Dumpas staggered but did not fall. The Eversharp claimed all of his senses. He saw a cryorg mortal standing beneath a crimson sky that Dumpas somehow recognized as another part of the Red Planet. The clone's face was identical to the woman he'd rescued from the leeches, yet subtly different. Younger, unscarred, and eyes not filled with fear but longing. She carried tools on her belt, the kind used for maintenance on colony superstructures. She gazed upward at a glass-domed habitat shimmering above her, and Dumpas could feel her desire. Not for freedom exactly, but for the chance of possibility. This cryorg mortal wanted a life not scripted by factory orders. This person wanted a name not assigned by a barcode. They wanted a sense of self, not carved from the echoes of someone else's DNA. Behind her, a second cryorg supervisor approached. She straightened instantly, expression shuddered, and the yearning swallowed whole. And then the image fractured. Dumpas gasped as the vision splintered apart like brittle metal. He fell to one knee beside a cluster of glowing flowers, steadying himself as the hum faded. Sweat dripped down his temples, and his breath felt heavy, as though the air of this planet resisted entering his lungs. And then he had an epiphany. The Eversharp was a memory anchor. They were never his memories, not even memories of this world. Some cognitive or psychic ruin of old networks with signals still pulsing faintly through ancient machinery buried deep below the soil. The praying family finally rose, and without glancing at Dumpas, they departed silently, vanishing back towards the forest as though they had never been solid to begin with. Dumpas remained kneeling in the grass, staring at the silent spires. That cryorg mortal from the spring now carried a strange resonance in his mind. Invisible threads connecting her to a life she didn't remember, to a future she hadn't lived. And then he touched the base of the spire. It was cold, unyielding, and timeless. And for the first time, Dumpas felt the entirety of the world's broken history pressing down on him. Cryorg wasn't simply mining. They were reclaiming technology, reclaiming people. They were reclaiming everything that once belonged to the old order. Dumpas left the Eversharp with the hum of buried machinery still vibrating behind his temples. For a long time, he walked without purpose and direction, a meandering meditation. The world felt tense and expectant, as if it was waiting for him to name something he did not fully understand. He hoped that the intersection would finally show him something to guide him on his way. And though Dumpas had expected it all to jar him all at once, clarity came not as a bolt of inspiration from the blue. It came as a slow knitting together of moments, every encounter, every rumor, every vision converging into a single thread, and that thread pointed backward. He knew it was time to turn home. His sojourn was at an end. He had had more than enough to bring back. He had more than enough to warn them. Cryorg was not simply mining up above. That feathered creature had whispered it first. Rare minerals were only one of their goals, yes, but it also sought the lost havens buried in the deep. Cryorg was searching for structures like his own home, remnants of networks they once controlled or coveted. That Cryorg mortal at the river was another warning, a clone engineered for obedience, but yearning for something more. A living product of a machine-like culture that was still operating and still experimenting and had never stopped expanding. And that final vision at the Eversharp of a different clone on Mars, identical in face and bone structure, moving beneath a sky humanity had once tamed, has told him that the Cryorg's research was not limited to the surface of this planet. They had archives, templates, histories, and they were stitching those histories back to the present. Cryorg was rebuilding itself and was intent on reclaiming the world it had abandoned. He thought of the drones in the hidden tunnel. They were fungus-covered, confused, and cut loose from their network, yet destined to be violently reclaimed. And then he thought of his own people, living quietly beneath the earth, content in their isolation for thousands of years, but they might be next. He swallowed hard. New alliances would be formed from necessity. It was a world at risk of being reclaimed, repurposed, and consumed once again. A sense of urgency clamped across his chest. He had to return now. His haven needed to know that Cryorg was stirring, mining, digging for old foundations. They needed to know the dangers above and below, the instability, the desperate beings, the visions of distant colonies somehow echoing across continents and centuries. They needed to know that the world was turning, and it might be turning to them soon. Dumpas turned sharply westward, orienting himself by instinct and memory. The caves of his homeland lay far beneath the layers of land, but he could almost feel their familiar, safe pulse. Cool, steady, and rhythmic like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. He took a step, and then another, and then broke into a steady jog. And he never looked back. He had seen enough to understand that the future was coming for them all. And as twilight draped itself across the forest, Dumpas descended towards the hidden entrance of the cave network he had once called home, armed not with weapons, but with knowledge. Dumpas Glebe had returned as the latest sojourner of the haven, but his role would be different. He needed his people prepared. War was coming. Lone Eons is the solo version of Lost Eons, which is a system set in the fantastically weird solar punk future where you and your party are taking on different classes that are so bizarre and wonderful that it is very unlike anything else I've seen in the TTRPG space. One of the things that's great about Lone Eons is, of course, its design as a solo version of it, but you're still going out and exploring this world and coming across dangers and oddities and little tastes of what humanity had experienced before it fractured and went off into this different stratification. Everyone that was left on Earth, essentially, we can say it's Earth. I don't think they ever explicitly say that it's Earth. They had to adapt. And there was a lot of mutation in different species along these lines. And then all the wealthy humans went off to Mars, and now they're on their way back. They're sending parties to start looking for resources, because that's what humanity does. It just uses up its resources and goes to the next location. I very much enjoyed the post-human solar punk sci-fi setting. It's very much remind me of Scavenger's Reign, which was a fantastic animated series that was on not that long ago. And it was just so bizarre that it was triggering new areas of my imagination to think differently about how spaces can be in a fantasy setting, I guess a sci-fi fantasy setting. The mechanics of it are pretty great as well, because it is, it uses a standard playing deck, and it uses oracles and tables for encounters and to see what things you're coming up against and the attitude of these things that you came across. Sometimes they're hostile, sometimes they're neutral, sometimes they're helpful. The tone itself of Lone Eons is appropriately lends itself towards more introspection, atmospheric, and a little melancholic at times, kind of, the exploration of a strange space on your own. I imagine if you play the Lost Eons version of it, it's you and a party doing the typical thing where you come together and figure out why you're together, but you're out exploring this world itself. The different classes are pretty fascinating as well. I rolled a shifter, which is basically a magic user, but at the same time, it's more mutation and bioorganic in nature. Honestly, it got me through a lot of really good encounters by being able to do that. So I feel like I was very fortunate that I rolled and picked that class rather than picking it out the gate. In typical fashion for a solo TTRPG, the random draws and procedural systems made for unique playthroughs. Going back to the title of the podcast, your story will be different than what happened for my character in this. I would say check it out for yourself. It's in the spectrum of very short to very long solo TTRPGs. I feel like this is smack dab in the middle. You can keep going if you really want to, if you literally play your cards right, or you can make it short, or, you can draw it out as long as you want to, especially if you're drawn into this world as much as I was. Thank you again for listening to Your Story Will Be Different. Just wanted to let you know an announcement that I've started a small campaign over on coffee.com to commission some episode artwork. So going forward, the individual episodes will have artwork that kind of reflects the tone. I recognize that the tone varies wildly on this podcast. Sometimes it's whimsical and sometimes it's horrible. So having some episode artwork commissioned by independent artists might be a great way to do that. Just head on over to coffee.com/yourstory. That's ko-fi.com/yourstory and kick in a digital $1 towards the campaign. For our next session, we're going to be playing Midnight Melodies, in which you are a jazz musician who is conscripted by death itself to hunt down errant souls. As always, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Lone Eons by David Blandy, so that way you can get going in your solar punk far future adventure and see how things shape up for your character. But just remember, your story will be different.